Hey everyone, have you ever wondered how we can really get to know someone's life story? I mean, beyond just the basic facts and into the experiences that actually shape them? Well, today, we're going to dive into exactly that. We're talking about narrative research, which is this really incredible way of understanding people through the stories they live and tell. And this quote from Clandinin and Connolly, who were some of the pioneers in this field, just nails it. Stories lived and told. It's so simple but so powerful, right? This isn't about bedtime stories, it's about the very core of our experience, the things that happen to us, and, just as importantly, how we talk about them. So here's our game plan. First, we'll cover the power of story and what narrative research actually is. Then we'll get into how you gather those stories in the first place and the process of putting them all together. We'll also touch on the researcher's role, which is huge. Look at some other tools in the toolkit, and then wrap up with a handy checklist. Okay, let's kick things off with the most important question. What exactly is narrative research? At its heart, it's a way of studying people by just listening to their stories. But what makes it different is that instead of, surveying hundreds of people, a narrative researcher might focus on just one or two individuals. It's all about going deep, not wide, getting that rich, detailed, personal journey. And you can see here what makes this method so special. When your whole goal is to explore the life of an individual, to really tell their unique story, this is the tool you reach for. It's purpose-built for that one single focus. Okay, so if you want to get someone's life story, how do you actually do it? This is where the quest begins, where researchers get practical about gathering these really personal accounts. A perfect example is a biographical study. Let's say a researcher wants to understand the experiences of new teachers. They're not just going to send out a survey. No way. They're going to sit down with them for hours, having deep conversations, recording their stories of what worked, what didn't, and what it really felt like to be in that classroom. But that brings up a really good question, doesn't it? Our memories can be fuzzy, kind of fragmented. So how do you help someone tap into those older memories? The ones that might be buried a little deeper? Well, here's a really cool technique for that. It's called the memory box. A researcher might ask someone to gather objects that are meaningful to them. Old photos, letters, maybe a concert ticket stub or a keepsake. These things act like little keys, unlocking memories and feelings that bring the stories to life in a much richer way. So once a researcher has collected all these interviews, diary entries, and maybe even things from a memory box, they've got a whole pile of story pieces. Now comes the hard part, putting that puzzle together. This is where they create the blueprint. And that puzzle building process has a name: restorying. It's the central part of the analysis where the researcher takes all those scattered memories and carefully puts them back together into a story that makes sense, usually in chronological order, with a clear beginning, middle, and end. And there are two main ways to look at the story when you're doing this. The first is thematic analysis. That's all about the what. What are the big ideas that keep coming up? The other is structural analysis, which looks at the how. How is the story being told? Is it a story of triumph? A tragedy? It's really the what versus the how. So to break it down, the process looks something like this. You start with all the raw material. Then you look for the classic story elements: the plot, the characters, the setting. After that, you rewrite it all into a logical timeline. And this last step is absolutely crucial. You work with the person to make sure your version of their story feels right to them. And that last point, collaboration, is huge. It brings us to maybe the most important part of this whole thing, the incredible responsibility a researcher has when they're handling someone else's life story. You have to understand, this is not a one-way street. The researcher isn't just a neutral observer taking notes. They're a partner. The final story is something they build together, a co-construction that comes out of the trust and the conversations they have. So, to keep that partnership balanced, researchers have to practice something called reflexivity. Basically, it means they are constantly checking in with themselves, asking, how is my life, my beliefs, my background shaping how I'm hearing and telling this story? It's a way to stay self-aware and fair. And all of this leads to some really tough questions, the kind that don't have easy answers. Who actually owns this story now? Who gets the final say on how it's told? What happens if two people remember the same event completely differently? These are the complex, human things at the very heart of this work. Now, like any field, this one is always evolving, and researchers are always finding new lenses to look through. So let's just quickly touch on a couple of more advanced approaches. So it's not always just about words. Researchers might use visual analysis, like going through an old family photo album to see how relationships have changed. Or they might use performance analysis. This is where they look at how someone tells a story, their tone of voice, their hand gestures, the pauses. Think about it. Sometimes how we say something is even more important than what we say. All right, we have covered a lot. So let's bring it all home with a really practical takeaway, a simple checklist for what makes a story work. Think of this as your cheat sheet. When you're trying to piece a story together, you can ask these questions. Is it clear who this is about? Is there some kind of challenge or turning point? Does it flow logically? And do we know where and when this is all happening? If you can check these 4 boxes, you've got the makings of a really solid narrative. And to wrap up, I'll leave you with this to think about. We've seen just how personal and powerful our stories are. So when it comes to your own life, who really has the right to tell that story? It's a big question and definitely something worth considering. Thanks for joining me.